I'll go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum present of 6 members. Item C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2018-19 budget development. Dr. Ely.
Mr. President, members of the board, we bring to you our budget workshop for May to talk about where we are in the 2018-19 budget development process. Just a reminder that the budget must be finalized and a tax rate set by August, and so we have that targeted for our regular August meeting on August the 21st. And so what you'll see today from Mr. Martindale talks about the progress that we've made today. We passed at least, we've got one significant piece of information to that will inform us that we'll talk about at length today, and then we still have a number of decisions ahead of us as we go throughout this process. But with that, I hand it over to Mike Martindale, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Martindale.
Test. Check. I was just checking because Chuck's always after me for not speaking into the microphone. So you're welcome, Mr. Glenn Winkle. In short, from April to May, we're holding the line, so to speak. So give you a little update as to where we are. Before I get into the new set of numbers for May, I want to go back and visit some of our historical information, of which you saw at the March meeting. But I think placing some of our more updated projected information in our graphs with our historicals just brings about a visual farce. As you recall, as I shared in March, from 2012 to 2017, we had an average of 7.2% increase on our property growth. We'd use that 6-year average to make some early initial projections. Our preliminary projected values provided by BCAD at the end of April has us tracking close to the 6.25% growth mark. So we're going to be looking at transitioning from 11 or almost 12% in current year down to closer to the 6% mark for 18-19. Also, if you will, before I move to the next slide, I want to make mention of this. When we calculate recapture, it's on the prior year or year in rear value. So when we look at recapture for next year, we're paying it off this almost 12% value relative to whatever our enrollment is for 18-19. So your values are back a year, but you're utilizing current year student count to determine that wealth value, which drives your recapture payment. So anyway, coming off a very strong year, settling in early projections below that 6-year average.
One question on that. So is it a complex formula, or is it just a property value?
We're provided an overall grand total growth, and then I account for a projected loss off of that.
It's total taxable values, freeze adjusted total taxable values divided by average daily attendance.
Okay, so there's not.
Oh, for the recapture.
For recapture.
Okay, I apologize. I thought you were speaking specifically as to how it came up the projected property value. Yes, it is. That value will lock in, but the number that will move on you will be that ADA throughout the course of the year. And so that's why you get some fluctuation through the course of the year, because that denominator moves on you. For average daily attendance, again, we are trending about the 3% mark through the 5th 6 weeks of this year. I believe it's like 298 to be exact, and we'll finish up the school year, reset this value. Currently, and this is not a surprise to you, you know we've been using 0.3 because we're in the process of determining exactly where that's going to play out through the course of the summer as we look for next year. But this is, the graph really, if you think about it, it paints a clear picture as to why we see such a jump in our recapture, why it compounded on us, because things kind of lined up perfectly, 11.74, and then we're projected at a 0.3 next year. So that really pushed that value up. In the past, when we've had these strong local values, that has pulled us out of our early deficit because we've been able to generate some revenue off the strong values. something that really will not be available to us through the course of planning for 18-19. Okay. So anticipated this particular scenario lining up on us to a degree. Actually, I thought it'd probably be more 19-20 than 18-19. However, knew this at some point in time, property values would start to kind of settle in on us. Coming a little bit earlier than I expected. However, it's the reason I put this particular slide and revisiting our fund balance and how we audited out the last couple of years. So there was some intention on trying to be conservative some of our budgeting the last couple of years because we could, to a degree, forecast this settling out at some point in time. So having been able to put a little money aside the last couple of years will serve us with managing, coming off a really strong year, low student enrollment growth, and a lower projected growth on our property values. So, the fact that we've fared well the last couple of years, again, it helps us manage getting situated for next year to a degree, so to speak. Again, the timeline you're familiar with. We're just working our way down that. Show you the most recent adjustments here in just a few minutes. We anticipate coming forward with compensation plan for employees for 18-19 at the June meeting, update in July. Not a lot of movement in there because we get those final values on July the 25th. Then we come to the board, as Dr. Ely mentioned in the beginning, with our final proposed budget for the board's consideration and the tax rate to support that. Some things kind of tugging at us this year that's just making us take a little, it's taking a little more time with the process and moving through with the budget is, for example, the low student growth that I mentioned to you at 0.3%. You can do the quick math on this. We were originally projected with the demographers for about a 3% growth for next year if there were no particular impact whatsoever. So that's a delta of a couple of $1 million. So you can see that's something that has pulled on us that to a degree that really you could not project that particular scenario. Again, it looks like our values are going to come in around the 6 mark. That would be the lowest amount of growth since back to 2014. Again, the lower student growth, the high values that we're enjoying this year generates the recapture payment. And I think we need not forget also, and our community is growing and we're opening campuses, but it adds to our operational costs significantly whenever we house a campus with people. Again, we're in Pecan Trail right now at $1.4 million for opening that. The $150,000 operating costs, that's really a low number. That's really just what we set aside for utilities, not to mention insurance and those types of things. So for Wellborn, we're at 2.4 and set aside an additional $200,000 for utilities on Wellborn. So just within the last couple of years, we've added almost $4 million to our M&O budget, just getting these buildings open. So these are a number of things that are just kind of making a little pull at us trying to get some movement in the budget, if you will. Exceptional item requests, again, you're familiar with the process we go through with principals and directors. Exceptional item request for the next year, as well as new personnel request. We had $1.9 million. You're familiar with that number. We were able to appropriate $650,000, and we're doing that in current year budget because we're doing well with some of our cost, and we're trying to adjust our revenue projections through the course of the year, more through the course of the year as opposed to toward the end. So this has created some capacity for us to do those things in current year. So that's how we're funding these particular items this year, because there's not capacity in 18-19 at this point in time. Some of the items in that, we've approved $579,000 so far, or some furniture requests from Rock Prairie, Spring Creek Elementary, Cypress Grove, A&M Consolidated Middle School, Consol, and CSHS. If it has an asterisk, those things are up for consideration by for board approval at their regular meeting this evening. So that's why I marked those. Those items are over 50,000. So they're on the agenda for your consideration this evening. Consol, that's for replacement of some old student desks. CSHS, that's the outfit, the portables we're placing there on campus for next year. Band instruments, both high schools. Consol's request came in a little, I believe 51, maybe 54,000. College Station High School was approved for an allotment as well, but it wasn't quite the $50,000 mark. Baseball stands replacement, that's on tonight's board agenda as well. I believe that's about 184,000. That will provide them with a much better situation there as far as their stands. That does also include a press box component because it's all one unit. And tennis court resurfacing at College Station High School also. As far as new personnel requests, I had earmarked $750,000 in next year's budget in 18-19. We've approved $759,000. Of that, and you've heard Ms. Perry's report earlier this spring, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, we've had significant growth in our special education population through the course of this year, so we need to address that growth as we get positioned for next year. Of this $759,000, $516,000 of it is associated with special education. At Spring Creek, we approved 2 Castle teachers to add to Spring Creek. At South Knoll, 1 life skills teacher. Pecan Trail, a life skills teacher and a resource teacher, and we're adding 4 sixth grade teachers. I'd staffed them a little bit lighter this year because of the grandfathering impact at the 6th grade. Several of those kids stayed at Cypress and Oakwood, so now they're getting a full grade level moving up, so we need to adjust that staffing accordingly. That was just a net add of 3 to the budget because I'm reallocating some existing staff there as well. Oakwood, an adaptive behavior teacher, an addition of 3 core teachers at College Station High School. That's on a 1 net add to the overall budget. Again, we're allocating some existing positions in the district there to help with that growth. District special education, 2 licensed special, 2 LSSP interns and 1 LSSP. I'm waiting for somebody to ask me about the intern, but I keep moving. Never mind. They have a 2-year intern after graduation, and they are supervised, and then they're allowed to test for board certification. So it allows Ms. Perry to get a little more capacity in her staffing by using it that way. Some examples. This is not an all-inclusive list. You remember we had over $5 million of requested personnel. This is just some examples of positions that were still on hold that we just don't have the capacity at this time projected in next year's budget. But College Station High School had requested more than 3 teachers. District operations, as we grow and add buildings, we have to always keep these folks in mind because the square footage increases, so we have to be cognizant of how we take care of that space. Still additional requests in special education, 2 dyslexia teachers, speech language pathologist, and 6 special education teachers, and those would be spread out throughout the district. A director of fine arts, and also a coordinator of social studies. Those are just some examples of positions still on hold. Again, this is far from an all-inclusive. From April to May, and here are the revenue markers I've used, and I'll show you the 5-year projection here in just a moment. Left ADA the same. Again, this number probably will take shape on us late. As we receive record requests and those types of things, have a better idea of exactly what that enrollment's going to look like. That'll probably be a late evolving number. Local values, again, the 6-year average was 7.2 based on April 30th values, projecting around the 6% mark. That's in blue because that is an adjustment from previously. Leaving the other local values as is, we'll close out the 3rd quarter of our financial year this month. So probably revisit these in June and July, anticipate some movement in these values as we project out for next year. But I'm going to wait till we close out school in the third quarter of this month before we start projecting on these numbers for next year. But there will be a little bit of movement in these. On the appropriations side, everything's staying consistent at this point in time. I realize that I've been telling the board we have 1.3 million set aside for salary adjustments, but I haven't really explained how that translates. That is actually $750 per teacher and 1.5%. That's applied to the midpoint of the pay grade for that particular position for everyone else. So teachers are on a salary schedule. So again, that will be a set dollar amount collectively off that salary schedule. Everybody else's percentage off midpoint of their pay grade.
And that's consistent with the study.
Salary study, yes, sir. Okay. This is actually year 2 of us transitioning into that. Health insurance, I don't have anything allocated for adjustments there. We spent $150,000 increasing our contribution last year. We increased our contribution $10 per month per participant. The earliest numbers came out with TRS and their high deductible, their lowest premium per participant, and that went up $16 per month. So if we were to consider adjusting the $16 per month per participant for that, then it would cost us just shy of $300,000 if we were to, at the end of the day, try to do something with that or not. I do not have adjustments currently in the budget for that. Supplies and materials, since we will not experience the same property value growth or as much of it. We're still growing, and that's a positive. But as we're accustomed to the last 3 years, we have to be very efficient with our appropriations and spending. So we're taking a look at some of those things, looking at 4-year spending trends, seeing where we're leaving funds so we can maybe reallocate and generate some capacity on our appropriations side to do a few things the next few months. New personnel request, that was $750. We went $759, so it was $9,000, so I highlighted it for you. Otherwise, it's fairly consistent. Wellborn is settling in right at 2.4. I think we're fully situated for Ms. Mishler and her group at 2.4 million. The recapture moved because we went from the 7.2% to the 6%, because recapture is calculated on previous year and then captured out of your current revenue. So that's because that went down. That's why this cost went down a little bit. If it would have went up, say, to maybe 8 million, then this would have went up a couple $100,000. So that will fluctuate too, depending until that value sets. Capital outlay, this is where I adjusted on the appropriations side to account for the offset of that revenue of bringing us off that 6-year average to 6.25. And again, if we're able to build some capacity in this through the next couple of months, then I'll watch that and do as much as possible. So not a whole lot of movement, actually any movement. Of course, our revenue came down because of the adjustment of property values. Appropriations, I adjusted accordingly to hold us in the same place we were last month at this point in time. So we're holding, again, holding ground at this point in time. Here's our 5-year projection. Put the arrows just where the changes I've already mentioned to you, the 6.25 on the property values. You see the change here, and just a little bit of tweaking of recapture came down a little bit, and the adjustment on the capital outlay to keep us at the 4.7. What had a little bit of a domino effect on us, and we'll work through this as we clean some things up and get tighter on our projections. They become more realistic numbers as opposed to, they become real numbers as opposed to projections over the next couple of months. Yes, last month I had this at 7% because of our past history. It felt like that was pretty conservative. Since we're tracking down a little bit, went back and changed this to 6%. Well, of course, this is less revenue, and it's a domino effect from the previous year too of a couple $1 million. So this number was sitting around 4 or 5, so it's pushed up a little bit now because we have a lesser revenue because of adjustments back here off those April values. But as we, again, look through our appropriations side and tighten this up to generate capacity, if we do anything on our local revenue sides up here with interest income and those types of things, those will flow forward and mirror out in the out years. So it will begin to have some impact on that number as we clean up this year's budget too. But that's why that number changed on you, is because you basically trimmed a couple $1 million out of local property value projections. So when you translate that to your graph, obviously you're going to have a line that's lower than last month. So the gold is your 17.5% of your appropriations, kind of where we want to keep an eye on things. The green was last month. Now, it looks blue, it's purple. That's current month. The green and the purple on top of one another because you stayed at 4.7 here at 2018-19. Where you see the separation from last month is here is because, again, we adjusted that 7% to 6%, so it dropped a little bit lower. So basically it pushes you to your cash flow number where we were getting there at the 2021 year. It's pushed us up as we move into 2020, so it's pushed up that a year. But again, as we start kind of hammering these things down a little more aggressively over the next couple of months, there'll be a little bit of a play in here as well that will start to tighten these up a little more. Just with all the things pulling on us, it's an opportunity to reflect on business and doing things as efficiently as possible. So with that, however, I want to leave on a positive note. Okay. While as we've added schools and everything else and recapturing our operations side of the budget, we were tracking in a very positive manner on our debt service side. Early projections will be able to lower the INS rate. I have 1.8 cents here. I think that's conservative. I think we'll be able to do better than that, but that's where I'm starting at this point in time. So while we are going to be chipping away at a large deficit, at the end of the day, we'll be able to lower our taxing rate on the taxpayer in the community due to our INS rate and some of our debt coming off. See, positive. Close with positive.
Could you go back 2 slides for me? So looking at that one on the state revenue
Here. Yeah, this is,
for all the way out,
yeah.
the recapture is basically equal to that or more than those 3 different revenues that we get from the state, right?
Yes, sir, that would be a correct assessment.
So the state TRS on behalf, the third one that you see there, that's a
Right.
wash. We
It's
get
an
it
in
in
and out.
up there, and then it's out on
Right
TRS
here.
on behalf right there. So it's really the
first two.
foundation school fund and the available school fund, which is what we get in state revenue.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Schaefer, if you, and Dr. D is absolutely right. The TRS on behalf is a wash. It's an in and out, basically. So you're looking at a 10.9 in revenue projected. Again, that will fluctuate as well depending on where this 0.3 goes. But early projections are 10.9, yes, sir, with an out of 14. So that is basically our deficit, you know, our opening. There's just a number of things pulling on us. And while, you know, no one's excited about this, I think considering all things that we're trying to manage and the fact that we anticipated this to a degree, our recapture high and our property values resetting. And that's why being able to put a little money aside the last couple of years didn't bother me so much, because I knew there was going to be a reset period coming at some point in time. And I think it's probably upon us the next year or two. Now, remember, next year is a legislative session as well. So that could or could not have an impact on what you're looking at for 1920. if they just reset the equalize the level of which recapture is calculated, we would recognize it would be a positive for us, So
So did I see on that slide you were on, the 2021 recapture payments, almost 19,500,000?
That's projections as of right now under
No,
the
I
current
got it.
funding system.
yes, sir. It was growing at a faster rate previously because of utilizing higher property values. So it actually slowed down a little bit because we drew these property values down.
That's insane.
We're not the only ones that yes, sir, it impacts a number of districts. Yes, sir, absolutely. So, but we'll work to manage that. We have good folks, and we'll look at how we're doing business and make sure that we'll embrace it as an opportunity for betterment.
Any other questions or?
I just think that that's something that we really need to, we do a good job marketing the successes of our students and programs, but I think we really need to start driving that point every way we can. I mean, that's $19 million for 1 year. That is, to me, that's insane.
That's it's a lot of people and resources that could be helping the children of our district. Yes, sir. A whole lot.
Should just be an outrage on that.
Any questions? I'm leaving with this slide. All right. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mike.
Is that it? Okay. C2, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to board policy FNF local regarding student drug testing. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. Before Mr. McIntyre comes up and starts this month's presentation on this, just want to talk a little bit about why we are here and having this discussion regarding student drug testing. I'll remind the board, we talked about this, I believe, first month in March when we sat down to discuss, and I mentioned that I've had a number of people in the community come up to me and want to visit about the possibility of drug testing of students, perhaps in high school, perhaps even earlier, in College Station ISD, and wondered if we had considered it. And I had mentioned that we had not had a community discussion or a board level discussion on this. Then I guess we talked about it a little bit internally with the superintendent's cabinet earlier in the year. But I was approached by two of our leaders in this school district earlier in the spring semester. Coach Fedora and Coach Huff both made an appointment and wanted to sit down with me and talk about the possibility of enacting some type of random student drug testing policy. Both of them came from districts that had such a policy in place, and they both felt strongly that it would be good for the school district and good for our students. It would give them, those kids who are looking for a way not to succumb to peer pressure, looking for an out, it would give them an out. And they realized that this was part of a larger conversation, and I did in fact tell them that we would need to have this conversation with the board and ultimately with the community if this was something that we wanted to do. And so we started that discussion in March. Now we're on our third month to discuss it. And I don't anticipate any decisions for another month or two, as we have a number of things to visit about and make decisions. So no decisions have been made, but I think it's important for us to have that discussion as a leadership team. I think it's important for our community to be involved in that discussion as well. So, and I think it's important to listen to our folks when they come to us with an idea. on this. So we also went back, not just the two athletic coordinator and head football coaches, but we went back and talked with our administration and leadership teams at our high schools and middle schools. And we talked with other extracurricular leaders. We talked with sponsors, directors, and those that oversee other fine arts and other extracurricular activities. And they concurred in the conversations that we've had with them, and our campus administrators have had with them in regards to wanting to move forward with this, and certainly to explore the possibilities and seeing a need for it in College Station ISD. So I just wanted to kind of put that picture in the frame as to just why we're here talking about this. And obviously we've got another couple months or so, month or two, to make an ultimate decision on which way we want to go as a leadership team on this. But just thought it was important to know the support and the coming from our leadership of our extracurricular activities in our campuses here in College Station ISD. That being said, we have our Mr. McIntyre here, Chief Administrative Officer, who's been doing a lot of really good work, working with school districts and policymakers throughout the state to come with you with some ideas about what this could look like. The first couple of months, we just talked about general ideas, and what Greg's going to share with you this afternoon is not our recommendations, but it's based on conversations that we've had with sponsors, directors, and coaches in College Station ISD, and it's reflective of those conversations. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Greg McIntyre to take us through the presentation. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. Thank you, Dr. Ely. Yeah, the last couple of months, obviously, we've had a chance to talk about random student drug testing and the idea of that process. And as Dr. Ely mentioned to you, I've had a time to talk with middle school principals, high school principals, directors, and also having a chance to that input from club sponsors and sponsors of different organizations at the high school level. You might remember that in the past we've always started with the why, and one of the biggest reasons is to serve as a deterrent, and also a credible means for our kids to resist peer pressure. I would list those as two of the more important ones that we have, and certainly as a source of information to parents and the general overall health and safety of our students. You might recall that we also talked about a few decision points and just things to think about since the last time that we were together. One of those decision points or things to think about was which grade levels. And in talking to the different groups that Dr. Ely and I have just mentioned, the consensus among the group is really more of an interest at the high school level than at the middle school level, to be quite honest with you. So at this point, taking a look at what grade levels, the answer to that would be starting to take a look at grades 9 through 12 at College View, Consolidated, and at CSHS. One of the other things to think about was extracurricular activities plus parking passes, and then those two plus giving parents the choice to opt in or volunteer their kids if they don't fall into those first two categories. And in our conversations, what we're taking a look at and talking about is, yes, that we'd be interested in all three of those options. Our extracurricular, not just sports and fine arts and so forth, but our organizations and clubs. Those kids with parking passes at College View, Consolidated, and CSHS, and of course for parents of high school age kids to be able to volunteer their children for this if they're so interested. Orientation meetings, one of the decisions to make is we have those orientation meetings for students or for both students and parents / guardians, and we really landed on really providing meetings for both students and parents to make sure that we're able to address their concerns and answer the questions along the way and provide the needed information along the way. A few other things was list of substances, including alcohol. And those that list of substances, the 9 panel that we've talked about the last 2 workshops, this is the same list that we've presented before. So that would be the 9-panel list of substances. Alcohol is included in that, so you could say the 9 plus alcohol. And then also the number of students tested. Heading into tonight, we had talked about possibly the percentage of students tested, and that's the percentage of students tested can be difficult to compute, actually, because you can have a student who fits in all those categories, or many of them. I could be a student who drives to school, so I would be on the parking pass list. I might be in athletics or fine arts or Latin club or something like that, so I'm listed again, or maybe even a third time. And so trying to decide, okay, in projecting how many students might be in one or two or maybe 3 groups, that backwards math gets a little convoluted, to be quite honest with you. And when we take a look at contracting with the number of students to test, that is on really a per student basis. Do we want to test 40 students, 60 students? That's really on a number, not a percentage. And so in talking with our different groups and with TASB in a conference call, we can say we would like to test up to, in this case, 900 students, rather than listing it as a percentage. So that in September, let me just kind of walk you through that, and we'll look at this a little bit later. In September, we might test 60, October, another 60, and move our way through. And so then you can actually list and compute the total number of students that you plan to list rather than a percentage. It's just a little bit easier to do that. So 900, so far as a starting point for that conversation. I'll show you the math a little bit later, but at some point, if we listed this number in board policy, and at some point in the future we say, well, okay, we've done this with high school, would we want to expand to middle school? That's a large enough number that lets us expand that a little bit without having to go back and update board policy every time we want to change it. Does that make sense? Gives us some, a little discretion there. Subsequent testing, just an initial note, we've talked about this in the past, that after an initial positive test is confirmed by a second test of the same sample before the testing company would report that as positive, or using their language, they call it a non-negative. So that initial sample is already tested again by them to confirm the initial result. Now, that positive or non-negative result would require the student in our conversations to test each subsequent time for the remainder of the school year. So if I'm a student and I've been through the process, there's a positive or a non-negative result, then I know that for the remainder of the school year, whenever we do test, I will automatically be included in that to make sure that we maintain those negative results till the end of the school year. Okay? A few other decision points. Obviously, the consequences. Well, if a student tests positive, or like I said, they call it non-negative, it means that he or she can practice, but cannot travel, suit up, compete, or perform during that sit-out period. In our conversations, we were taking a look at a first positive result would be a 15 calendar day sit-out period, so far as no competition, no performance. They could still practice, but not compete or perform. Now, last time we spoke, we had up there 15 school days, not calendar days. The reason for the change this time around, at least in our conversations, was that it can get a little difficult as to what constitutes a school day. If it's over the winter break and I'm a student who is required to be in a tournament, let's say, but it's not necessarily a compulsory attendance day, but I am required to be at that tournament, does that count as a school day, or does it not count as a school day? Does that fit in the sit-out period? Does it not? It's much, much easier to pull out a calendar and physically count off the days. And so we really felt like that calendar days was a much easier understanding for everyone. And you can see the first would be 15, the second is 30 calendar days, and the third is a full year, 365 calendar days. And of course, the same note at the bottom, that initial positive test is one that's already been, again, tested again by the company to make sure of the results. Of course, appeals, that was one of the other decision points. We already have local policy FNG. It's just I think, worthy to note that the student would be ineligible for participation while that appeal is pending.
Are the timeframes on that, is it meaningful? Or is like,
I guess it depends if it's your second or third
yeah,
offense.
Yeah, the time frame involved on a first offense with 15 calendar days. There's, I think, 10 calendar days to be able to submit the request and submit the grievance and have it acted upon by level 1. So it would be a little tough for the first
for a
the
first
first infraction, I
offense,
guess is what I was
there's
looking for.
really, effectively, potentially no appeal.
Well, it could get overturned at the lowest level, at level 1, potentially.
Okay.
As far as the timeline, the same timeline that we've considered before, and that would be beginning with the 18-19 school year. That would have 3 key components to it: registration, orientation, and consent. And then let's take a look at pricing. In the past, we've taken a look at the 2017 pricing, but since we met last, the Harris County Department of Ed Co-op was able to go ahead and award the pricing to 3 different companies. And so the example I'm using here is from one of those 3. And so for the 9-panel plus alcohol, that would be $20 per test. And then we had talked about here in workshop last time that we were interested in the synthetic marijuana or K2 testing as well. That testing is $40. And so if you put those 2 together, that would be a total of $60 per test.
So it's just for the K2?
Yes, sir. That's just for the K2. Now, another component is what is called a retest of the original sample. Now, remember, in order for a positive or non-negative to be reported, it's already been tested twice. But if a parent made a request for that original sample to be retested by another certified or approved lab at their expense, that would be $150 for that sample to be sent to another approved lab and to go through their testing on top of that, or in addition to, I should say. So let's take a look at just an example only. If we had, for instance, let's say 60 students per testing session. If we think about our 2 comprehensive high schools, that would be 30 students at each comprehensive high school. We would have, in this example, 9 testing sessions per school year. That's once per month from September through May. And then if you combine the 9-panel with alcohol and the K2 for a total of $60, well, you can do the math and multiply that out. That comes out to about $32,000 for the year in this example. Okay? Now, certainly some of those variables can change. Rather than testing 60 students per session, it could be 40 students. That would put 20 students at each comprehensive high school. Instead of 9 testing sessions, it could be 8. You could say, well, we go September through April, but not May. So there's some variables here, but just wanted to kind of walk us through an example of what that cost would look like on an annual basis in this type of a scenario. Okay?
A question on the alcohol. Does that, I'm naive, but I'm assuming alcohol would not stay in the blood system as long as drugs, or is it true?
You're correct. You are correct.
So on that, I'm just thinking that my random thing, if alcohol goes out in a day, of your system? What is it? One is, what do you think the cost is for the,
I think what they do is the 9-panel, they throw in alcohol there kind of just as a bonus. It's not like they have a 9-panel in this particular, correct me if
That's
I'm wrong,
correct.
Greg,
That's
but they don't
correct.
have a 9-panel without alcohol and a 9-panel with alcohol. It's just, they kind of throw that in there as well.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but if they're going out Friday night drinking, it's not going to catch them on Monday morning.
No,
No, sir.
no. That is correct. Yeah, so in this example, they do go ahead and automatically include alcohol, knowing that it's going to be metabolized very quickly. If a student may have been drinking that morning or something like that, it may show up. However, they do not have separate pricing where they take that out. It's just included automatically.
So, because I've seen this before and had a chance to do the math, I want to highlight this. If we look at this example that we have here, with 9 testing sessions per school year and 60 students per testing session, I still believe that's 540 kids. If you look at the students who would be eligible at the high school level, about 3,700 high school kids all told, that comes out to about 15% of our high school kids who have the opportunity to be tested in a school year based on these numbers right here. So,
But it's still phrased up to 900, so we could do that.
yeah, we could do more. And Greg was talking about we would like for board policy to stay and not have to go and update it whenever we decided if it was, future leadership, future boards wanted to add middle schools, let's say, or whenever we have the third comprehensive high school come aboard, that we have capacity in there by the wording and the potential wording in the board policy to have enough without having to go back and change it.
That's 15% of the overall school population, but not necessarily the percentage of kids that are
Correct.
eligible for testing, right? I mean, that's going to end up being a much larger percentage of kids that are running extracurriculars and parking, yes?
It is. If you think about, when you think of extracurriculars, a lot of our kids are involved in extracurricular clubs and activities and other types of things. So it's a bigger number than you might think. Also, I didn't count all the College View kids and so on. We have more than 3,700, so I don't know what our exact number is, but just a rough order of magnitude, it was 14.8, something like that percent. So be a little bit more than that potentially.
I only have one more slide. Questions, concerns, comments?
This is certainly not everything that needs to be considered. There's a few other things that we would need to consider and want to bring back to you in June. But wanted to put some placeholder amounts in there hopefully for some discussion, and just love to hear what questions you have or comments, discussion you have in regards to what we put forward this month.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have current questions they want to ask?
Well, I think this is probably a pretty easy one on the appeal process. So they are ineligible until the appeal is heard, as it's written now.
Correct.
Or is it? And we hear about the false positives. We get to bring up Seinfeld right now and poppy seeds, or there we go. Or if somebody, I had a young man at our store, drug tested at A&M, failed the drug test. He's on ADHD medication. He did not inform them. It was his fault, but he's getting left for the SEC meet. And how would something like that play out?
Glad you asked.
I'm sorry?
I'm glad you asked.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead if you like.
No, you're the expert.
Whenever the testing company has a positive or the non-negative, as they call it, come up, what they do is that they contact the parents first, and they ask the parents for any prescriptions that student might be taking. They then go from there, and their doctor, who would contact both the pharmacy and the family doctor to confirm that those prescriptions are indeed the ones that student is prescribed. And so then they go through that process. During that process, we are not notified that those communications are taking place. So it is not reported to us as a positive or non-negative. They're working through the process first to confirm or not.
While protecting their privacy.
Absolutely, protecting their privacy. That communication takes place between the doctor and the family. And then, of course, like I said, the pharmacy and family doctor to make sure that that has run its full course before it's ever reported to us as a positive.
What about the proverbial poppy seed muffin?
I have not specifically asked about the poppy seed
I mean,
muffin.
but are dietary things going to trigger a non-negative?
I'm sure that would be part of the questioning that their doctor goes through as well. Sure.
I think the overall sophistication of testing in 2018 versus the mid-90s when Seinfeld was
I think
on
it was
air,
90s, yes.
I believe have advanced the science a little bit farther along on that, but we've not seen a poppy seed muffin FAQ.
Okay,
That is true.
they've probably worked through that. I mean, just a couple of broader questions, and I think we need to kind of work through them. I mean, clearly we can do it. There's the question, should we do it? Does it work? Do we have evidence that it works for what we're trying to accomplish? And I tell you, I struggle a bit with it just from the sense that government intruding in people's lives. I mean, that issue is what it is. But if it works, and if you all tell me as educators that, yeah, we think we can, let's say, break a cycle here that our folks think needs to be broken, then I definitely can get on board with it. But I think it's important for all of us to reflect on that and figure out our answers to it. And then the last one, it's just to make sure that we have safeguards in place to make sure we're not having some type of disparate impact on any particular group. I mean, I don't know who potentially could be using these substances, but I mean, I don't know if the orchestra kids all like that. I mean, I just don't know. But I want to make sure that we have things in place to make sure that it's evenly applied and we're not doing anything inappropriate. And I know you all think that and think about it, but I just want to articulate it.
Thank you. Greg, can you talk about the random selection procedure?
Now, the computer random selection is taken. It is the company that we contract that would actually pull the names from the list of names that we submit to them. If we wanted to, we could say, okay, at each comprehensive high school, if we're testing 30 students total, we would like 15 for 15 to be boys and 15 to be girls, and they can do that. I think you can. Now, how far would you want to carry that, and can you carry that? I've not asked those questions. But typically what happens is that for those groups that we decide are going to be involved in the pool to be pulled from, extracurriculars, parking passes, and then anyone who volunteers their child from it, we submit that list of names, and then it is up to them to randomly select them from that list.
Would each name be on the list once, or do
Each
you
name
get
would be
it-
on the list
Okay,
once.
so it's not like a raffle where you get multiple entries for multiple activities.
No, it's not like
No.
the NBA lottery tonight. No, it's not. We're a different percentage of being selected. Some of the information that Greg has shared with me talks about the process. It is a double-blind process to where each student would be put in there and then randomly assigned a number, and then that number gets randomly selected, and they have to go back. They don't know who the students are, and they have to go back and match that up with the student. So it's important to note that it's a double-line process that's being done by the testing company, not by College Station ISD, not by either of our comprehensive high schools. Nobody's being selected or targeted or oversampled. We'd be following their procedure in doing that.
As you've looked, I know you've done a lot of work, but have you gotten a feel for what the exposed liability is to the districts that have these in place? And if you don't at this time, I mean, maybe that's a future question that maybe you could answer. And then the other thing, are there other effective methods being used by other districts to deter drug use other than drug testing? And again, I don't expect you to answer that right now unless you have an answer, but those are some things I'd like to.
Well, as far as deterring drug use, I think, as we talked about last time, and from some of the information from articles that I think I've sent you guys as well, a lot of it has to do with the climate and culture of that community, school, and school district. If it is a very permissive culture and climate, then drug testing as a standalone measure is not that effective, to be quite honest with you. And for instance, I was talking to one of the directors or principals a few weeks ago, and we were talking about if we were in another state, let's say, I don't know, Colorado perhaps, where is a more permissive culture and climate, standalone drug testing is probably not as much of a deterrent in that situation as it might be in College Station, Texas. And so I do think that we have a culture and climate that would be congruent with testing. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the end-all be-all and the step to take necessarily. But from a culture and climate perspective, I would see where we have one that is, again, a little bit more congruent with it. Now, would it solve concerns or issues that we have seen? That's, I think, very difficult to predict. If we have students in the past who have had issues with any of these 9 panel, would this act as a strong enough deterrent? I don't know. If we have students who are thinking about possibly in their peer group experimenting or something like that, would it serve as a deterrent as, I might be tested on Monday. I might not need to do this. I think it could. But I think that's for this group to decide if that's the next step that we want to take.
Leave it to me to ask another crazy question. Instead of alcohol, how long that stays in your blood system, how about marijuana and secondhand smoke? So you got a whole bunch of people out. Have you read anything like that crazy question?
From what I've read, I don't think that secondhand smoke would trigger a positive or non-negative result in this type of a testing. Right.
I guess the other question too is that your coaches have come to you and that kind of thing. Is there any way for us to have? I know you can't have specific statistics without someone telling you yourself, but a better idea of how we can provide some context about what the problem could be in College Station, because I think sometimes people don't believe there is one sometimes here in this town, and believe that I just think it's hard to measure, and I know that, but how we could provide context maybe to the community and to the board about maybe what they see the problems being. Is there?
So we've not done any type of school-wide or district-wide drug and alcohol survey in the last couple of years, to my knowledge. Chrissy could correct me. We may have the opportunity to do one. In fact, we've got an opportunity for next year to be involved in a survey that we could have some more information then. But with being 2 weeks of school's out, we wouldn't really have that available for us right now. But that's a conversation we've had, just a contextual idea of what the issue is in College Station, some type of anonymous survey of school students. And there are other organizations that do those reputable surveys.
I've got to believe that the coaches didn't just come to you for no reason. I don't know if there's some way that they could provide context as to why they think this is a good idea, other than they just saw it used in other district. You see where I'm going with this? I just don't want, this isn't just something random we're all looking at. There's something that has triggered this, or you wouldn't have come to us.
And I would say it's more than just the coaches, it's other members in the community over the last 12 to 15 months who've come to me as well and cited specific instances of things that have happened to either their kids or their kids' friends, or things that they know are going on in the community. And they've come concerned for our kids and for our community. That's why they wanted to have those discussions.
Yeah, I think that's, important to note that it wasn't just the coaches, it's community members that have come to you as well, saying that they've seen firsthand a problem, and that's why it's been brought to us, because it's obviously something more than just one person coming to you at this time.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else?
No, just last time we mentioned like a counseling aspect to it. And I did note, that you said that if they have a non-negative test result, they will then be tested again and again. Is there any kind of counseling support that can go along with a non-negative? Has anything been thought of?
We're still working on that, to be honest with you. And at this point, we have not been able to locate a community resource that would provide that specific kind of counseling. And what we're talking about is a very specific type, which is drug and alcohol counseling. We have not been able to do that, but we're going to continue to work on that and then come back in June. Okay.
Thank you.
Probably one thing that I would also want to know if we could information. So the drug, what would our role be? So is there enough where we'd have to hire additional employee? How much involvement would it take? Because I know you were talking about appeal process. So I guess my question is, have we thought about how much human resource time that's going to
Yeah, the appeal process I don't anticipate would take an inordinate amount of time. We work through appeals of lots of different things throughout the school year. As far as the actual administration of the testing, it's the testing company that comes and does all that. They travel here, they do the testing, they collect the samples, they are in charge of the chain of custody of the samples and everything like that. It would be us, writing passes, getting kids in and out of class, and monitoring them. So if you think about, 15 boys and 15 girls at a comprehensive high school.
on that one day or that 1 month?
Yes. Yes, sir. And maybe it's one day at one high school and one day at another. And then, and our thoughts too are, what about College View? College View is such a smaller group, and we could provide them transportation over to Consol or College Station High School, wherever the testing is being done. And so we would do that inside the school district, be able to take care of that. So we don't anticipate it would be an inordinate amount of staff time or resources for the actual administration of the test.
Okay, this is probably a random question. How much time does it take of the student to actually get pulled out of class and go do the test?
It depends.
Okay.
What I can tell you is that we had a lot of conversation about when we tested, back when UIL was doing steroid testing, and that was also collecting urine samples. And in that time, we would test about 20 students in a given day, starting around 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and that would take till about 2 in the afternoon to process all those students. And so I think that's one reason that you see in our examples that we're talking about 20 to 30 students in a given day probably is about the limit given our past experience, because it takes some students longer than it does others.
I got it. Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre, you mentioned testing for steroids, and forgive my ignorance here, but have we ever done this before?
As far as the steroid testing?
No, have we ever done random drug testing in the district?
I would have to refer to Ms. Hester on that one, who I think is on the front row behind me.
She's actually nodding her head.
Yeah.
So back in the late 80s, 90s, I've been here 18 years, so it predates me.
I was just curious if we did, why did we stop? I didn't mean to make everyone look at you, but we are.
It was mandated by UIL, and it was mandated across the state. It wasn't College Station ISD that decided not to do it anymore. The state,
Oh.
UIL decided not to.
Well, that's the steroid testing. Mr. Nugent's asking about drug and alcohol testing.
We did that too.
It's hard for us to know. A number of us weren't here in leadership or even back in those times. My guess is there were other considerations that came up, either budget-wise or priority-wise in the district, and we moved a different direction.
She should tell us what she. Can you tell us? Can you tell us about when it occurred and why we quit, in your opinion?
You want to talk up there?
This is only my opinion, not, so I was involved, and it took a lot of time. It's a little more complicated because getting the kids out of class and getting them down and the people involved and helping all that and getting them involved. One of the questions was what kind of drug testing. In those days, there were several institutions in town that we really had some referrals to. But what we found, what happened is when a person tested positive, only that's not what they say a non-negative. They did that then. Then when they tested again, or then when it was time for the parent to say yes, the parents would all ask for them to be tested again. And then at that point, the drug companies were not at the point where they were able to handle all of this at that time. So I think it got so convoluted that not a lot happened because it broke down, in my opinion, at the drug company level. So.
Just for clarification, drug company that did the testing, or the ones that we made referrals to in the community?
The drug company that did the testing.
Okay, thank you.
So you got to think that that's more sophisticated.
I think that it's changed, that it's a more comprehensive I think that
it is.
companies now have a much cleaner process than they did in those days. I think it kind of came on fast, particularly around the steroid time, and it wasn't as refined.
Well, and I'm trying, I lived in those days. What I kind of remember is, well, especially in that steroid, the state instituted it, is that correct? And they instituted it for all districts, correct? And they probably, what I remember most about all this is that they did not, and correct me if I'm wrong, support the districts, much like sometimes they put a mandate on us now and we have to figure it out. Would you agree with that, or? Yes.
Yes.
The UIL steroid testing experiment, for lack of a better term, in the early 2000s was very expensive, because steroid tests are much more expensive than the tests that we're considering here, and it did not identify that many. I mean, very few kids did it identify, because personal opinion, don't believe we had a huge issue with steroid use among athletes at the high school level at that time. I think when you look at steroid use versus drug and alcohol use by high school students, you're going to find more recreational drug and alcohol use than you're going to find in steroids. And so that's one of the, big differences in that. I would like to mention that, we've got drug testing going on in College Station ISD already. And we have the DOT drug and alcohol testing for our anybody who's a district-approved driver. So all of our folks who drive for transportation, our coaches and other directors who drive for extracurricular routes for their teams and their squads, and anybody else who's on the district-approved driver list. So we're already working with a company that is doing this and has been doing this for years for us. It's just for employees. So it's not uncommon for us on the employee realm.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, C3. Consider a resolution for alternative graduation requirements for students who entered the ninth grade prior to 2011-12 school year and have completed all coursework. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, members of the board. Chrissy did such a good job on item 2. We're going to have her back for item 3. What we have before you is I'd like to have a brief discussion here at the workshop, and this is an action item on the agenda this evening at the regular regular meeting at 7 o'clock. And I want to talk about this resolution that we're asking you to consider. 2 legislative sessions ago, the 83rd Texas Legislature, as the state assessment system moved from tax to STAR. You recall that change. You recall that initially students were to, in high school, were to pass 15 end-of-course exams for them to be able to graduate. That got changed down to 5 end-of-course exams for students to have to graduate, to pass to be able to graduate. As a part of all of those changes, the legislature did pass a law that allowed for what's known as IGCs, or individualized graduation committees. And that is a kind of a transition for students who did not pass one or more of their end-of-course exams, but met every other thing that they needed to be able to graduate. An individualized graduation committee to come together, and that's the student, the parent, and a teacher, and I believe a counselor or administrator as a part of that committee. And they could look at alternatives to passing the end-of-course exams to signify meeting the standard for graduation. How did they do in subsequent administrations of the English 2 EOC? Did they get better? Did they pass their course? Did they pass other assessments that could be used? And so this IGC concept has been continued to be put into practice in the 84th and 85th legislature. So that is something for our kids who, and not just in College Station ISD, but around the state, who don't pass all 5 of their end-of-course exams, for them to look for people who know the child to be able to look at other forms of data to be able to make a decision on whether they can graduate. With that as a backdrop, this last legislative session in 2017, the legislature took that concept and said, well, how about we look at some of our older students who've failed to meet the standards, and could we apply the same type of logic for these kids? So what has happened in the past for students who have not met the assessment requirements for graduation, be it TOS way back in the 90s and early 2000s, or TAX from 2003 to 2011, those folks still come back and take a tax assessment, which is mainly what we're talking about right now. And they try to pass one of the 4 sections they missed, whether it's English language arts, math, science, or social studies. So we have folks continue that have not been in our schools for the past several years who come back and take these assessments. So what we have before you tonight for your consideration and ultimately vote at the 7 o'clock meeting is a response to the flexibility offered in this last legislative session to take this same type of IGC concept, what they're calling local graduation committees, and apply that to these students who are still subject to passing the tax test. And so as you will see before you, the alternative requirements, there are 8. I want to make sure there are 8 different local requirements that you see on page 1 of 2 there. And we do have Chrissy up here to answer more specific questions should you have them about that. These have some of the same types of things in here. What was their grade in the course? If they failed a U.S. history end of course assessment, what was their grade in U.S. history? What are examples of proficiency in projects or other work samples? How did as they've retaken the English 1, English 2, Algebra 1, biology, whatever, what have you, how have their grades progressed over their multiple other opportunities to take this exam? How's their school attendance been? How's their coursework been? Have they participated in these remediation opportunities that we offer for our students? So those are any number of these 8 things that this local graduation committee could consider to be able to allow these folks who have already completed every credit they will with College Station ISD to be able to go ahead and graduate using these things. So that's what we have before you. This has just been put into policy or put into regulation in what, May 3rd?
May 3rd, there's a small window, May 3rd to September 1st.
September 1st, 2019
Right.
is what it has on there. So
That's what I was going to ask. Why
are we
such a
bringing this
short
to you
shelf
now?
life? No, I got that. But why such? Is it sunset or is it just?
This is the legislation that was enacted, and so they did put a time frame on it that at the end of, I guess, August 31st, 2019, or September 1st, 2019, it does sunset or it does end.
But it's a gift. We're very happy about it. It's a gift. The councils are very happy about it. We have at least 10 kids that we know of that have been coming back every summer or whenever we give it several times a year to come take it, and they come to remediation and they're frustrated and they've passed all their courses, and so we are very excited that we're going to be able to help. They just have to get one of those 8, not all of them. And so we're very excited to be able to have a committee to help those kids actually get their diploma.
We say kids, but these are young adults
Oh, yeah,
in our
right.
community. I mean, because we're talking about before
They've been out of school for a while.
2011, 2012.
Yeah.
I share your excitement. Anything that we can do to help people improve their lives like this is a great opportunity.
And again, I just want to make certain, they're just lacking part of the tax.
Yes,
correct?
that's all, one section of it.
And we all know how I feel about that, so
Yes, we do.
I'm very excited.
We're very excited. It's a little gift. We're very happy to take care of it, and we won't need till September 19th. Till September 19 we can get it done.
Are these young adults aware of this, or are we going to have to
We're
contact them?
trying to find them,
Okay,
so we have found many of them.
First, the board would have to adopt the resolution,
correct.
which is up for your consideration at the 7 o'clock meeting. Then should that happen, then we have folks at Consol, because College Station High School wasn't in existence at this time. Both Consol and College View, who stay in touch with these young adults, and so we will be reaching out to them.
Great. Anything else?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I guess with that, we are adjourned until 7?
7 o'clock. Yes, sir.